Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dojo Live. This is Tulio Sugusa from Southern California. Broadcasting along with me is Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico. And today we have our special guest. Why am I not seeing everybody? We have our guest, Sandra, who's our head of our design team and joining us as well. You're in Hermosillo as well, Sandra?
Yes, here
Excellent.
in the desert.
Hermosillo's in the house today. And of course, we have our guest, Alejandro Rivas, who's the founder and CEO of Userlytics. And we're going to talk about everything user experience today. But a little more than that. But before we go and dig in and get to the topic of today's conversation, let's get to know our guest. First of all, welcome to the show again, Alejandro. Please, if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll dig in and see what Userlytics is all about.
Well, thank you, Tulio, and thank you all for having me on the show. Briefly about myself, I guess what is known as a serial entrepreneur. So that, translated to me at least, means that there have been some successful exits and there have been some learning experiences along the way. Born in San Francisco a long time ago, but I lost my hair at a very early age, so I went through all that process a long time ago. Nuclear engineer originally, and I've lived and worked in many different countries around the world: Japan, France, all over the United States, Spain, and have started companies in those three continents. And the last company I started is Userlytics, a remote user experience testing platform.
What an interesting background. Love to get a perspective, a global perspective on things. So tell us about Userlytics. What was that aha moment that made you decide to create this company, and what is it that you guys do today?
Sure. Userlytics is about user experience optimization. And you or your listeners might ask, why is that important? What we have found is that you can invest money in marketing in a business. You can invest in operations. You can invest in product, in research and development. But one of the highest, if not the highest, returns on investment is user experience. It trumps everything else. And if you look as an example, Zoom, well-known company, enters a market that was enormously crowded 13 years after that market was created, already full of incumbents. And yet Zoom owns its market. Why? Slightly better user experience. Not even a step change, just slightly better user experience. That's just one example of how impactful and important user experience is. And our company is I'm very fortunate to be able to say, one of the global leaders in user experience testing.
Wow.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's see what we can learn today. There's a lot to unpack. If you could please introduce the topic and the how that we're going to look to understand today, Kim, would be appreciated.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you, Tulio, Sandra, and Alejandro for being here today. Alejandro, the topic of conversation that you chose is startup and scale-up culture in a 100% remote environment. And we're specifically talking about scaling a business, how to manage employees, clientele, and a global participant panel in a post-COVID world. So what I really am interested about is this idea of a 100% remote environment. Are you convinced, Alejandro, that this is the absolute way of the future?
It's a great question. And I think anywhere you look now, whether it's large entities on Wall Street like Goldman Sachs, or large tech firms in Silicon Valley like Apple, or smaller, not yet giants, but getting there like Userlytics, this question is top of mind. how do we deal with the new world? Everything changed after the pandemic. And those that think that we're going back to the old world, I think are gravely mistaken. However, the new world is as yet undefined. What does it mean? Does it mean that we're going to have a hybrid working environment where Tuesdays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Wednesdays or whatever it is, we go into the office and the rest of the days we don't? Many companies have adopted that approach. I personally don't believe in it. Are we going to go into a mode where it's 100% remote, end of story, that's it? You know, there are some companies that even before the pandemic, one that comes to mind is Hotjar. It's somewhat related to our space, a little bit tangential, but very successful company. They were remote from day one, and they all started on an island in the Mediterranean. So it's not like they had a difficulty to commute to work. You know, it was just a stone's throw away. They could have done it easily, but they decided from day one, no, we're going to be remote from day one. And I'm talking about years before the pandemic. It worked for them. However, I don't subscribe to the view that that is the future. I think it can work for some companies, some corporate cultures. Difficult one. I can tell you what we're doing.
Please.
What we have come up with is a model where we have 2 offices right now, one in Europe, in Madrid, Spain, one in Miami, US. And many of our employees live near those offices, and they're free to go into the office if they want to, not go into the office if they don't want to, or some days yes, some days no. Completely up to them. Others do not live or work near those locations. And post-pandemic, if you will, that brings certain advantages to us. When we're looking for talent, we can say, you know what? This is a great person. He lives in Canada. No problem. She lives in Colombia. No problem. He lives in Taiwan. She lives in the Philippines. He lives in Portugal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can bring all these people in. He lives in South Africa. And by the way, all those examples are real, are areas where we have employees currently. Now,
Very cool.
we decided there is some benefit, huge benefit actually, to having in-person, face-to-face interaction. So how do you garnish that? How do you get that benefit? But at the same time, leverage the huge benefit of not forcing employees to spend 2 hours of their life every day going back and forth to work. So what we came up with was, okay, when you work for Userlytics, yes, you can decide when and if you're going to go to the office, but occasionally we will ask you to come for a group get-together. It could be regional. Last November, we had a North American get-together. It could be departmental. A few weeks ago, we had a tech team get-together in Madrid. Or it can be a global get-together. At the end of May, early June, we're having a global get-together of every employee for 1 week in Madrid, Spain. And we've seen that model so far work well for us. But I'd be lying to you if I could predict, you know, that's going to be the future. It's our best guess, our 2 cents, if you will.
Thank you.
So Alejandro, just curious, I'm listening here and I'm wondering, if we look at the shifts in industrial revolution to the information age, to the gig economy, that's kind of where we are right now, right? So it appears as though we are still stuck in the methodology of the industrial revolution. Everybody shows up at the office, punch the clock, you know, that kind of setup and mindset. And yet we've had two significant shifts since then, especially knowledge workers. What's the point of going in, clocking in? You have all the technology at your fingertip. Do you think that the pandemic has sort of been the catalyst to finally wake up and say, you know what, we've been stuck in a system of doing things that really doesn't even apply in how we do things today? And what are your thoughts on that? And how do you get people to begin to realize, to let go of the past that didn't exactly serve them in this new reality, especially for knowledge workers?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I remember hearing a funny comment about it during the pandemic in the first few months that said the pandemic just launched us on a rocket ship into the future, as is to say that we were going at this rate, little by little, going into the future, and then all of a sudden we went, step change into it, and I think that's very true. Now, there are those who are trying to, as we say in Spanish, put a door in the field. In other words, they're trying to stop what is an unstoppable force. There are some investment banks in New York that have struck, no, we got to bring everybody back into the office. And you think, who are the people pushing for that? Well, it's, the CEO and other very top level executives who have a nice house on the Upper East Side. It's not a problem for them to commute to work. So they don't see the issues. But it's just not going to happen. And why is that? Because if they institute those kind of policies, and by the way, there's certain giants in Silicon Valley who have also had the same kind of mindset. Companies like us are going to be able to get people that say, you know what, I enjoy working for this company where there's more flexibility and a culture that is more trusting of the employees than for some of these other giant behemoths, regardless of their brand name or even their compensation. And that's the market working. And the market ultimately will force those large companies. They're all complaining about employee churn, the great resignation, all that stuff. So far, knock on wood, we haven't seen that. And I suspect that other companies that had a similar cultural approach as ours are also not seeing that. And we're seeing a paradigm shift. It's going to take years, perhaps even decades, for all of us to really understand all these changes. But it's big, and it's happening right now.
Yeah. Alejandro, I it really resonates with me what you were saying, because we definitely changed as a human being before and after the pandemic. But I also see these changes on how we interact with different softwares. Have you identified any pattern or changes from the user perspective, or what will be your advice for all of these people that have different products and they are having changes but don't link them to the way users change as well?
Well, the user is definitely something that is fundamental to look at. And if you look at the typical organization of any large department, they've got marketing, they've got, if they're in the software field, a development area, they've got a QA area, all these things. But only in the past few years have they started to really build up and empower the user research team, the user experience team. I think an analogy here is interesting. If you go into a restaurant and you don't like the food so much, or you don't like the ambiance so much, or something about the waiter pisses you off, it's going to take you a lot of discomfort to leave, because you're already sitting down there, getting up in the middle of the meal. Let's just finish the meal. We won't come back, but we'll finish the meal. If you're visiting a website or a mobile app and you don't like anything at all, in 2 milliseconds, you're gone. And that is a huge difference. And one of the things that the pandemic has done is that it's made organizations really accelerate their digital transformation. And so they have to take into account the user in everything they do. And by the way, when we talk about the user, another analogy that I think is worth thinking about is, imagine that you send 10 people to cross a room. And of those 10, one person trips on a fold in the rug. Now, one way to look at that is, great, 90% had no problem. We're doing great. Another way to look at it is to say, let's remove that fold in the rug, because if we do so, the other 9 people, the next time they cross the room, even if it was because of luck or instinct or something else, they will feel a better experience. And that's what, user-centered experience optimization is all about. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, you definitely did.
Yeah, I liked it. Well, I think I always appreciate we're able to take tech and thought and make it much more tangible. Back to what you said earlier at the show, using Zoom as your example. And I think that when a company is able to become the noun or even become a verb, they've really arrived, right? So when we think of video conferencing, we say, I'll Zoom you, even if we're using some other platform, right? Or if you're going to buy window cleaner, it's Windex, regardless of what brand it is, right? So what do you see in that example or any example of those minor tweaks that make all the difference? And how are companies able to discover that?
Yeah, I mean, it would be difficult for me to generalize because it's so particular to each kind of journey. I think if you want to think of a bad user experience, call any interactive voice response audio text based technology, like, your bank. You want to talk to a human being and they put you first on an IVR system and you got to answer questions, and some of the questions, they don't really grasp what your issue is, so none of the answers are good, so you end up getting quite frustrated and quite angry. That's an example of a bad user experience. But then how do you define a good user experience? A good user experience, in a sense, is almost making the interface invisible to the user. They don't notice it. It's not an obstacle. It's out of their way. There's themselves, their goals, what they want to achieve, and there's nothing in between. So, sometimes when new user interfaces are developed, the designers, who tend to be people who are, very artistically inclined and, hugely talented people, work with the product managers who likewise, they're thinking about all these cool things we could do. And the end result is lots of stuff, lots of noise, lots of things on the page. And if you think about Google in its first iteration, when it first came out, back in the day, at that time, its competitors, again, a crowded market when they got in there, entities like Yahoo, etc., very crowded pages. And if you recall, Google at that time launched, and it was just a white page with a search box. That was it. Nothing else. It was simple, but enormously usable. So it's hard for me to answer this question well in terms of, what works as a user experience, because it's always going to depend upon the context, what you're trying to achieve, where you're going, etc. But it's kind of like, you'll know it when you see it or when you experience it, right? And I can give you another example of a absolutely stunning user experience. In the United Kingdom, when you want to create a new company, there's an organization, it's a governmental organization called Company House, and you set up your new company there, and you file your annual reports there, etc., etc. Well, typically, governmental entities are not great at designing great user experiences. That's a generalization, but it's largely true. However, one of the best, if not the best, user experience I've ever had in my life was going through the Company House website. Absolutely fabulous user experience. I don't know how they did it. I would like to say they were my client. Unfortunately, I cannot make that claim. But I would love to have them as a reference, because it's absolutely incredible, their user experience. So again, you know it when you feel it. You see it, you experience it. But it's hard to say, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. There are little rules here and there, but it all depends on the context.
So Alejandro, let's talk a little bit about, maybe there are some I don't know if we want to call them red flags or levers that would indicate that a company needs to relook at their user experience. I mean, we think Kim made a really interesting point about companies that are synonymous with certain things. Xerox used to be synonymous with making a copy, but not anymore. Their lunch was eaten by the bubble jet printer, right? So they failed to keep up with that shift in the marketplace, which was predominantly driven by people working from home. Interestingly enough, right? I could get a Canon bubble jet printer. I don't need to spend $2,500 on a Xerox laser printer. So this was an example of a company that was dominant in this space, but yet fail to keep up with the trends and meeting the users where they are. You talk about being invisible. To me, it sounds like meeting the user where they are, right? So what are some of the things that companies need to be looking out for that's an indication that perhaps someone's out to eat their lunch?
It's a great question. So, because it's very important, the end result, as you pointed out an example, and there are others out there. There's Kodak, there's all kinds of examples out there. So when we work in a company, we tend to focus on the immediate, my market share, my bottom line, this particular product, how many complaints are coming in the door, etc. And what we do, in part, we help companies with that phase of their work. So, hey, Userlytics, I'm losing a ton of users in my marketing funnel at this stage of the purchase process. I don't know why. I just know that we're losing a lot of them at this stage. So we help run some tests for them and find out why. That's part of what we do. But we always encourage companies to do something additional, which goes to your point, which is doing what we call exploratory research. Because one type of research is just finding, okay, this is the existing process, this is what's happening, this is what's going wrong, this is why, etc. But exploratory research is taking a step back and saying, okay, my customer needs to do XYZ. That's their goal. Let's talk to them and ask them about that goal and ask them how they satisfy their goal. Because out of that conversation, we're not asking them to look at anything specific. We don't have a predefined survey in mind. We're just asking, tell us about your day-to-day, for example. Tell us about what concerns you when you wake up in the morning. What worries you? What are you trying to solve? And out of those conversations, which are completely open-ended conversations, all of a sudden, we may see emerge insights into, oh my God, these people, they're starting to look for, capabilities that I never thought of. Let me give you an example. Imagine that you're a Nokia phone manufacturer in the early 2000s, and you're doing this kind of research with your users, and you're thinking of telephony, you're thinking of mobile phone quality, you're thinking about calls, and you ask people, not necessarily Nokia users, just phone users, so how do you use your phone? What do you do with your phone? Oh, well, I take photos, I take selfies, I take photos, I take selfies, I take movies, I take selfies, and all of a sudden, wait a second, they don't want a phone, they want a camera that makes phone calls occasionally. And that changes your mindset, and all of a sudden, you may redesign everything about, your product goals, your company strategy, and everything that goes with it. That kind of insight is either something that happens to you by luck or by doing this kind of exploratory research, open-ended questions, trying to get to the bottom of what people want, why they want it, how they're achieving their goals. And that's very important, because how people achieve their goals frequently involves a hack. People are hacking existing processes, tools, toys, etc., to achieve their desired outcomes. If you discover a hack that is related to your product and services, then you can say, wait a second, I can make that hack disappear and give them a solution that's defined for that goal they're trying to achieve. I don't know if that answers your question. Excuse me for extending myself here a little bit.
No, it completely does. And I think it really helps that big piece of the puzzle. But I want to take it back to the title of the show, and that's how do we scale it? So I think that's something that's very interesting, right? How can we take that key essence, that necessity, and scale it?
Great question, because that involves both organizational structure and organizational culture and top C-suite empowerment. So most organization structures are not set up for this kind of thing. For them, they have the old mindset of market research is this little box that we do occasionally, once every 3 or 6 months, we have a meeting, we do that. It's not embedded into an agile, continuous, iterative testing, check it out, tweak, fix, do it again, etc. process. So that's organizational structure. And part of the answer to your question is you have to change. I mean, like what we've done from a structure perspective is unite the developers and the designers in single teams, even though they report to different units. But there's a lot more to it than that. So part of it is that. Part of it is culture. Let me give you another analogy. I'm sorry, I'm throwing a lot of analogies at you guys today, but imagine life before the invention of the toothbrush. Okay, you're going through life, you're eating a lot.
I'd rather
you're
not.
Eating. Okay, sorry, but all of a sudden your teeth start hurting. You have to go to a dentist. The dentist technology of that day, pull a string, pull it out. Okay, fixed. On to the next thing. Now, in a sense, a usability lab, as envisaged, say, 10 years ago, was exactly that. It was something you did occasionally. You would bring people into a in-person facility, check out the usability, and then try to fix it from there. With our kinds of technology, you can do this every day or every week or every month, but iteratively and continuously, not at the same level of detail and depth that you could do in a lab environment. So not in the same way that you would do in a dentist, but in the same way that you would brush your teeth. Now, here's the thing. If you grew up as a kid brushing your teeth and with your parents telling you every day to brush your teeth, you do that automatically when you're an adult. But what happens if the toothbrush is invented when you're 30? You really have to culturalize yourself to, I got to do this every day and get used to it. So that's a cultural change. And the third element is CEO empowerment. This has to come from above. One of the things we saw in our particular market is that around 2015, our market exploded. Why did it explode? Because at that time, the CEOs of the day, at least in the US and UK, were waking up and saying, reading the newspaper, Slack worth billions of dollars. Hey, what's this Slack thing? Oh, it's a messaging app. A messaging app? Billions of dollars? Yeah, but it has a great user experience. What are we doing about user experience? And it was like this mindset change that occurred at the top level. And all of a sudden, the number of user experience researchers in organizations went from 2 to 20 to 200. Budgets increased, visibility increased, empowerment increased, etc. Sorry, and again, I've extended myself a little bit too much there in my answer.
It's perfect.
No, we like how you think. I mean, this everything you've talked about is I'm a big proponent of design thinking, and I mean it just par for the course, right? Cultural design, alignment, all these things are critically important to making it all happen, and it's continuous, as you said. So let's shift a little bit. We're running out of time. We're practically up on time. We wouldn't want to miss out getting to know a little bit the Userlytics culture. If you could describe for us what's the day in the life there. We have a lot of listeners and audience members who are interested in learning about unique companies. If you could just share that with us, what's the day in the life at Userlytics?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I must say that of the organizations that I've had the pleasure to lead over time, this is the one that I feel most happy and proud of, and specifically because of that, because of the culture. It's, with the exception of myself, it's a very young team, and there's a lot of energy. It's a very diverse team in terms of everything. And it's we have certain values in terms of being polite to each other, being polite to our customers, to our suppliers, to everybody that we deal with. So politeness is a key value, professionalism. We're working very much as teams. It's interesting because, when the pandemic occurred, everybody, myself included, was worried about, okay, everybody working remotely, maybe people are going to be surfing all day long or doing this or doing that. And it turned out that, yes, people did sometimes take time off from their day to do things that were important to them from a personal perspective. But then they would make up for that, and more than make up for it, in terms of hours that are not the traditional, 8 to 5 working for us. So I'd say, to answer your question, it's a very fluid, very collegial and congenial atmosphere. Very exciting because, we're growing 70-80% per year. So that we're very fortunate in that sense. We're in a market that's exploding. But yeah, it's a very happy place to work. A significant number of employees have received, I know as a matter of fact, offers of significantly higher compensation than what they receive with us. And they haven't taken it because they just enjoy working here. And that, for me, is the best takeaway I could have. I'm very proud of that. I'm not saying that I'm responsible for it. We all are collectively, but I'm very happy to be a part of that.
Very awesome. Well, thank you for being a part of our Dojo Live show today, Alejandro. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our half an hour. Sandra, thank you for joining us as well and your input with UI, UX, and Tulio, as ever. This is our final show of the week, just one show this week, but you can, of course, catch us every Monday at 12 o'clock Pacific at Dojo Live to discuss our recap. We'll be talking about Alejandro's show, our takeaways of it, and introducing you to next week's shows as well. So stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Kim, Tulio, Sandra. Great chatting with you. Thanks to your audience. Take care.
Thank you.